All right, today we're diving into one of the most loaded words in political history: appeasement. We're going to trace the decisions made in the late 1930s to figure out the answer to a massive question. How on earth did a policy that was designed to prevent a war end up leading Europe straight into one? Okay, so what are we actually talking about when we say appeasement? The slide gives us the formal definition, but a better way to think about it is like a high-stakes negotiation. You're basically giving an aggressor what they claim to want, and you're just hoping that they'll be satisfied and the crisis will end. The key word there, of course, is hoping. And that right there, that's the great paradox of this whole story. It's the question historians have been wrestling with for almost a century. So let's follow the chain of events step by step and see how a policy that started with pretty understandable intentions went so completely and tragically wrong. Now, to really get why leaders chose appeasement, we have to try and put ourselves back in the 1930s. It's easy for us to judge with hindsight, but this wasn't a policy that came from nowhere. It was born out of a very real, very raw, and totally understandable fear of repeating the horrors of the past. Yeah, just look at the world they were living in. First, the memory of World War I was still a fresh, horrific wound for an entire generation. Second, the Great Depression had absolutely shattered their economies, so the idea of paying for another war seemed impossible. On top of that, there was a quiet, nagging feeling in Britain that maybe, just maybe, the Treaty of Versailles had been too tough on Germany. And the final piece of the puzzle? The United States wanted nothing to do with Europe's problems, so Britain and France felt like they were completely on their own. So into this climate of anxiety and hesitation steps Adolf Hitler. He sees a world that's afraid of conflict, and he starts to push. He begins making these calculated moves, these gambles, to see just how much he can get away with before somebody finally tries to stop him. His first big test comes in 1936. He marches his army into the Rhineland, which was supposed to be a demilitarized zone, and this was a massive bluff. His own generals had secret orders to retreat immediately if the French army moved against them, but nobody did anything. So he got bolder. 2 years later, he annexes Austria, the Anschluss, another direct violation of the treaty. And again, the world just stood by and watched. And this quote just perfectly sums up the attitude in Britain at the time. The general feeling was, well, he's a German leader marching troops into a German part of Germany. Why on earth would we risk a war over that? But what they saw as a reasonable, small concession, Hitler saw as a giant green light. It taught him a lesson. He could break the rules, and no one would stop him. All right, so that brings us to the event that would become the symbol of appeasement, the Sudeten Crisis of 1938. This is the moment the policy hits its absolute peak, and Europe is pushed to the very edge of war. So, Hitler's next target is a region in Czechoslovakia called the Sudetenland. Now, his excuse is that he needs to protect the ethnic Germans living there. But the real reason was strategic. The Sudetenland contained all of Czechoslovakia's border defenses and a lot of its heavy industry. To give it away would be to leave the country defenseless, and Hitler demanded all of it. Now, in a move that was pretty shocking at the time, the British Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, flew to Germany, not once, but 3 times, to personally negotiate with Hitler. But it wasn't really a negotiation. Each time they met, Hitler just raised his demands, pushing for more and more. The whole crisis came to a head at a last-ditch conference in Munich. You had 4 powers in the room: Britain, France, Italy, and Germany, all gathered to decide the fate of this one small country. And here's the most incredible and most unjust part of the whole story. The one country that wasn't invited to the Munich conference was Czechoslovakia itself. Their leaders were literally told to wait outside while these other nations decided their fate for them. Chamberlain flew back to London and was greeted as a hero. I mean, you have to remember, people were terrified of war. So when he stepped off that plane waving the agreement signed by Hitler and declared he had secured peace for our time, it was a moment of incredible, widespread relief. He truly believed he had acted as a statesman and saved a generation from another war. But that feeling of relief was tragically short-lived, because the peace Chamberlain believed in was built on a promise from a man who had zero intention of keeping his word. The whole illusion was about to come crashing down. And this really says it all. The promise Hitler made in September was that the Sudetenland was his absolute final demand in Europe. The reality, less than 6 months later, was German tanks rolling into what was left of Czechoslovakia. This wasn't about uniting German people anymore. this was pure conquest, and it proved, once and for all, that Hitler's promises meant absolutely nothing.
That was the breaking point. The invasion of Czechoslovakia completely shattered any remaining faith in appeasement. British policy shifted almost overnight. The line was finally drawn. Britain made a public, ironclad guarantee to defend Poland, which everyone knew was next on Hitler's list.
But here's the thing. After years of being given everything he wanted, Hitler just didn't believe them. He was convinced Britain and France would back down again, that they'd blink just like they always had. He was about to make his last and most fatal miscalculation. From there, the final dominoes fell with stunning speed. First, Hitler shocked the world by signing a non-aggression pact with his arch-enemy, the Soviet Union, which secured his eastern flank. Then, on September 1st, 1939, his armies invaded Poland. This time, there were no more flights, no more conferences. The line had been crossed. 2 days later, Britain and France made good on their promise and declared war on Germany. The Second World War had begun.
And so we are left with this big, complicated question that still hangs over this whole period. Was appeasement a noble failure, a desperate, well-intentioned effort to prevent another horrific war? Or was it a pragmatic, if cynical, strategy to simply buy more time for Britain to rearm for a war that was coming no matter what? The answer isn't simple, and it's a debate that continues to influence how we think about foreign policy to this very day.